Hello, everybody. Mark and Adi, we're back again, and today we are focusing on family dynamics in the workplace. So we're taking a little bit of a deeper dive, and we're focusing today on a thing called transference, which is something that, as psychodynamic professionals, we love to talk about. In fact, it's the cornerstone of my practice, and Dee, I'm sure you work with it, a ton too. And we're going to talk about how that comes into the
Every day.
workplace, what to do every day, right? What to do about it, and some common transferences that can happen if you are a team leader and you're in a position of authority, if you're a small business owner, things like that. So, Adi, you want to tell us a little bit about what transference is?
Sure. So when we say transference, it's a term that started in Freud and developed into a million directions. But just for the layman and kind of understanding what we're talking about, if you've never heard of it before, the idea is that we as human beings have a psychic world, the soul, the psyche, however you want to think about it, that has different powers than push and pull. We want something and we have an idea that it's unacceptable. We have all these like very primitive desires and aggression going on for us, and it's in interaction with other people. And so the way we interacted, the way that our desires, our aggressions, our strong feelings came about in our family system and how others responded to us will mold us to expect and bring into interactions with others something familiar and old. And in therapy, when you are sitting in front of your therapist, you will put in the therapist some stuff that you expect parental figures or people in authority positions to have, to embody, and you expect a certain reaction. You will read into who they are something that has to do with you. So, for example, if I had a very critical mother, for example, and I assume that older or in position of power female figures will criticize me and will attack me or try to stop me from doing what I want, I would unconsciously assume that that's what my female therapist is trying to do with me. And I will do whatever it is that I do in order to cope with it. Maybe I'll try to be pleasing. Maybe I'll be aggressive in return. Maybe I will not show up to treatment. Like I will do things in response to that person that embodies that old relationship. And there are different ways in which there are different kind of like more specific behaviors or trends that might come up. So for example, I might split. I might only see the therapist as good or only as bad. Or I might project. I might have some anger or longing care of them. I will have an old response to this new situation. And that old response will dictate how I bring myself into that situation. Now, the transference is met by countertransference. So the therapist also has a set of response, emotions, ideas, and urges to act that come up for them in response to the patient. So we need to know, is that response just objective, like that person is just bringing that out of people, or is it subjective? Is it my pile of history, my baggage that I bring with me that creates this reaction? So I know for myself that I react very differently to people who I perceive as female figures and male figures, because my mom and my dad are very different people and they brought up different things for me. So I need to ask myself, am I responding to this person because I have a knee-jerk reaction, a transferential reaction to anybody who is of the male persuasion? Or is this person actually objectively is this and that, and I am responding to them? So do I want to please a male authority figure and want to do right by them and want compliments from them because this is a great boss that I love and I want to excel for? Or am I just very anxiously wanting to make sure that a male figure is never disappointed in me? Like, what is going on for me? So that's kind of like a nutshell. And I wonder if you have anything to add about transference that you think will kind of explain that term to our viewers.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I would go with this is that it's tricky. right? And we're going to teach you a little bit about transference. I hope that it inspires you to do some reading and learn more. But I can at least speak for me. In almost nearly a decade of work now, I feel like I'm just now getting a handle of when it's actually happening. So even though you're getting this great education, it doesn't mean that you can spot transference everywhere, right? Because it actually is something that's very unconscious, very sneaky, and for most people feels normal, right? The idea is that when you treat people this way, because we treat everybody this way, it just feels like a normal thing. Like, oh, everybody should do this. Everybody sees the world this way. Everybody thinks this way. It's difficult without any kind of, introspection, whether that be therapy or spiritual practice or, journaling practice, to notice when something from the past is actually affecting you. It requires some kind of metacognition, right? The ability to take a step back, the ability to kind of see what's going on from an objective viewpoint, and being able to say, like, okay, wow, my reaction doesn't really fit what's going on. Something that I tell a lot of my clients that tends to help them is this phrase, which is, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And the word hysterical, a very simple way to look at it from an analytic perspective, is that it's an emotional reaction that is orders of magnitude above what a typical reaction would be, right? So for instance, if the boss says something, a little comment like, I don't know, hey, I saw you at lunch a little bit too late, a normal person would probably feel, a little sad, a little disappointed, a little bit, guilty, but then be able to go back onto their day. If there's a transference reaction coming on, you might get devastated by a comment like that. You might feel like you're going to cry. You might feel like you want to hit the boss. You might feel like you want to run away. It might really just like go through all the layers and hit something deep inside you. What's going to hit is what we lovingly refer to as emotional baggage, right? Like it's going to hit some of your baggage and therefore trigger a transference reaction. So that being said, as a leader, and this is topics we'll come into as we go, the first thing to do actually isn't to start with transference. It's actually to look at your workplace, strategically. See, hey, are there patterns and dynamics, something like we talked about last week, that are happening here that we need to address? Is there a policy change that needs to happen, right? Maybe there's just not a good flow of information. People are like legitimately confused and pissed off. Are there diversity practices that we need to uptake? Like, are we not being inclusive and accepting to different people, and not just different people from different backgrounds, but also different viewpoints, different work styles, different educational backgrounds, different ways of being. Like maybe just the way that we do business just simply doesn't work for someone of a certain type of background. There's a lot of stuff to do before you start making it personal, for lack of a better word. But if you do all that stuff and it still doesn't work, then it's probably something deeply, deeply, deeply personal. Adi, you want to tell us a little bit how transference goes both ways?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about countertransference.
Yeah. So what we want to know, what we want to pay attention to is there a pattern? And is that a little different than what seems to be the norm? So if there is a person, if most people enjoy working with someone and get along with him, and there's another person and most people get along with them and enjoy working with them, and for some reason one of these characters has a strong reaction, probably negative reaction. We're talking about a negative, something that doesn't really work to this individual. Could there be that they are tapping into something? And again, we want to be very, very cautious and careful, especially because we know that when somebody comes from a diversity background, they might bring something unusual and they might see something that everybody is compliant with. And we don't want to scapegoat somebody who is non-compliant with a status quo that is actually unhealthy and disrespectful to certain types of people. We don't want that. What we want to pay attention to is when somebody has a really strong reaction to something that most people will say is benign and isn't that problematic, when something could be resolved with a simple conversation, a misunderstanding can't be undone. We talked last week about the article by Bernstein from 2013. He gives this nice example of an employee getting just a really kind of maybe a little bit critical, but mostly kind of a feedback comment, and shutting down and not talking to their boss for 2 weeks when that has never happened before. Like they have talked in the past, they never had 2 weeks in which they really weren't communicating. And what do you do when something suddenly changes, when there is a change in atmosphere, somebody is responding really strongly? And some people are difficult people to work with, and that's a little different. And that might be tons of transference and countertransference there, and you might have to address it in a different way. We're talking about a really workable and by and large functional team in which something odd is happening. You would know that because something is different. And as a manager, you got to ask yourself, how do I respond to this? What's my part? Because when something is a little off, when something is a little challenging, when communication is not working, we also have old reactions. And the way to kind of start getting to understand it is ask, do I have a pattern? Every time I see this, do I respond in a way that isn't effective? Like I'm not resolving it, I'm running away from it, I'm becoming really anxious, I don't want to talk to this person, I don't want to resolve this problem. And is it more than the usual discomfort when there is an issue? We all become somewhat uncomfortable. Am I treating this as a catastrophe, a tragedy? Am I becoming forgetful? Suddenly late to a meeting when I'm not the kind of person who's usually late? Am I doing things to not address something heads on because of some emotional distress that's coming up for me that is unusual for me as a manager or as an employee? And when people respond to us in a way that is uncomfortable for us, or we detect discomfort in them, some old stuff might come up. So notice, is there a difference? Is there an intensity that is unusual? And is there avoidance? That will tell you that maybe something here is old. Now, there might be, again, an individual or a group at your workplace that are just legitimately hard to work with. And you might be fatigued and it might be a little toxic. Transference conferences might be there, but this is a bigger systematic issue that might need to be resolved. If that's not the case, and you suddenly have a really strong reaction to your employee, noticing them in a position where you don't want to resolve it with them, ask yourself, does this remind me? Is this an old feeling? Try to ask yourself, is this feeling familiar in some way? And if so, who was it that I felt this feeling with in the past? Could it be a parent or a sibling or a teacher, somebody that had some connection with me and it was hard for me to cope with them? If that feeling has some old roots, it might be unconsciously ingrained in you to respond in that way.
Yeah, so I think to wrap it up here, I just want to present a little bit of a composite case study. My work with team leaders, startup founders, business owners, I find a lot of this pattern happening. So I would love to hear if you're listening, tuning in live, or watching it on replay. If this is you, let us know, because this happens with almost everyone that I work with, and it seems very personal, but it's like, oh wow, other people feel this way. So we talked last time about this idea of, am I competent and am I lovable? Right? About how in the family we had this idea of wanting to be lovable and then acting out these old patterns in order to get love. And in the workplace, it translates to competence. Well, I found that many high performers don't feel lovable, right? And I'm one of them, right? I was a nerd. I got bullied, right? I feel like I didn't belong. And many people I work with had this, so they never felt lovable during most of their life. And they, compound it, some of them have abusive childhoods, some of them have neglectful parents, so they didn't really feel lovable at home either. And many of the leaders I work with, it's actually a weird phenomenon founding, are looking for a sense of home or a sense of place, a sense of belonging. It seems to be a very key value. So the idea is that these people will actually go out and create businesses or create teams in order to generate that sense of love and that sense of home, which on the surface sounds noble, right? It's like, oh great, you want your work to feel like a home, you want it to be safe. But ultimately it just generates a ton of transference because they're rebuilding their family or their ideal family in their workplace. So what this looks like very concretely for leaders is, relying on their employees for validation and feedback, right? Really needing them to be their friends, to be their confidant, to be their family members. It can often manifest as gossiping or, really being dependent on them if they like you or don't like you, so it can become a people-pleasing type behavior. I think some people try to create home by being too much of a lax leader and not holding people accountable because they're like, oh, I want it to be a loving workplace. I want everyone to like me. I want it to be fun for people. And that leads to poor boundaries. I think in the most extreme of poor boundaries, it can lead to, having an affair with somebody at work or doing drugs or alcohol with somebody at work, excessive, to a point where those boundaries break down and the personal life and the professional life mesh in an unhealthy way. And also, many startup owners that I work with and small business owners, their self-worth is very, very much tied to their business success, right? Because they throw their whole identity into it, right? So it's not just about who they are. It's not just about what they do, but it becomes who they are. So if the product is selling, they're happy, and if the product is not, or they hit a obstacle, they get incredibly depressed and sad. So they're starting to tie their identity to this thing that, yeah, is like kind of in your control, but ultimately not really, right? The market is very, very hard to predict, and if anyone tells you they know it, they're lying. So all these old things can start to come online, and you can start to treat people in your team or in your workplace like family members. You can start to recruit them to play roles. You can start to take on this authority thing that ultimately becomes very toxic and very, very messy. So yeah, Adia, as we're wrapping up here, any final thoughts on that kind of case study?
I want to say that when we are in a role or when others are in a role, we're losing something. Other parts of ourselves and of them are not invited to the mix. So we're losing creativity, we're losing stability, we're losing flexibility. When even if that role is really appealing to us to be in or to see in others, like if somebody's the clown and we love it, they bring like this levity to the team, we do want to be careful that we don't lean into it too much and recruit them to do that for the team, because we might lose their wisdom, their stability, their sadness. The different parts of us can really enrich the workplace and bring a lot to a team. So the reason that we're talking about these roles is that they're limiting, they don't allow, and they're exhausting. And it means that we are cut off from other sources of energy and presence that are not going to be there. I can give a little example. When I was like, my prior incarnation, when I was in Israel, I worked for a high-tech company, and I was very loved there and very appreciated. But then I became a student. It was kind of like a short period of time where I did something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more into the high-tech part in the team. And then I became a student. So I just was in the front desk because I couldn't spend my whole time working full-time the way I did before. And it was kind of boring. I did my own thing. I wasn't so engaged. And there was a man there who didn't know me from my prior role. And he came in and he was extremely critical and demeaning to me, saying something really rude and kind of aggressive, seeing that I'm not doing anything, that I was dicking around on the internet or something. So he said that to me and I was so shocked. And then I kind of like talked to other people, and they were surprised as well because they liked working with him. They thought he was great. And so next time I saw him, I was like, what were you doing talking to me this way? And he said to me, that's how I talk to my daughter when she's not making the most out of her time. And what I had to say is like, I'm not your daughter. And so I did my own pattern of immediately when he talked to me that way, I shut down. And I felt very ashamed and very embarrassed and confused, but also enraged that I'm being treated in an unfair way. And then I needed to consult. And it was actually out of my character at that time to approach him directly and be like, what was that? So I stepped out of my role of either being loved and appreciated automatically or feeling completely abused and little and small and without a voice when somebody is being aggressive to me. I found a little bit of a voice, which was great for me. And when he said it, I realized that it was an older man. He sees young women as somebody that he's supposed to push to work harder, do more. There's some discomfort in him when he sees a young woman being idle for whatever reason. Maybe he feels like a bad dad. Maybe he feels like it's his responsibility, or maybe he has some ideas about young femininity that I don't know, that has something intimidating for him. But my claim is like, I am not your daughter. First of all, I don't think you should treat your daughter that way either, but that's none of my business. And that to me was kind of like in a nutshell. It was very simplistic, and he immediately said that. It wasn't that we had to like go through some process. So I do want to say that employees and bosses are not in therapy together. You're not therapists, and you're not supposed to therapize each other. Don't analyze each other. That's not the point. The point is to pay attention when actually you're treating someone as a family member, or when you become a family member, like an old role is coming up, an old pattern is coming up, and then to own up to it simply and try to resolve it. So again, if anybody is interested in the Bernstein article, what he recommended is like, go to your employee and say, hey, I'm seeing a change in pattern of communication. We need to work together. Let's figure it out. More in a problem solving kind of, what do we need to do to go up above this hurdle and move forward? You could mention, and especially if you do know something about someone's past, being like, this seems old. Let's look at our relationship and what's working in it, and lean on that to work well together. Try to notice if you're starting to therapize each other. That is also not so healthy. That's not what you need to do in a workplace. And I think next time we'll talk a little bit more about that. Like, what can you actually do?
Yeah, next time we're going to focus on some key strategies that you can do either as an employee or an employer or someone on a team that can start to recognize and talk about this. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments if you like this kind of topic. It's clear we could keep talking about this forever. There's so many wrinkles to this, and this really is a cornerstone and what we bring differently to organizations. So please let us know if you like this. If you can wrap your head around it, and we would like to hear your thoughts if you've experienced a transferential reaction or like one of those hysterical moments that you're like, whoa, this is like way more than what's going on. So we'll see you all in a couple of weeks, and we'll get concrete about what we're doing and how to make it work. Take care, everybody. Bye.